this is an overview of my latest X-Pendant design. You may have seen my previous design, which is the wireless version, but there were some issues with that one that I decided to make it simpler. So I've switched to this one, which is the wired version, uses a micro USB connector. It has nice tactile buttons and some LEDs that serve various functions, which I'll go over later in the video. It's about 6 inches by 4 inches by 1 inch. It has a nice textured feel to it, so nice fit in your hands. Alright, so let's talk about some of the basics here. On the left hand side you have your typical jogging buttons. We have a step bit button, the setup button. On the right hand side we have home, console, escape. Then we have our raise your Z, probe all, probe Z. You have 0, X, Y, and Z. And we have bump, park, and work. So across the top you'll notice they have 4 LEDs here, and the top indication signifies the step size. Now this is for the jogging. So as you jog, you can change the step using the step bit button to a different size step to increment your jogging. Alright, so this first bit here I'm going to show you is using Easel, which I use quite a bit, but there is functionality for PicSender and for UGS, which I'll go into later. So here we're about to start the job. Your machine is here where you left it when you last was working on something. So the first thing to do with Easel is you open the console. So this button opens the console in the machine inspector automatically, and although you can't see it on the screen, it opens it so that you're ready to start sending commands to the device. So the first thing we want to do is we want to home the machine. So we'll let that do its thing. So now that it's homed, we want to jog around the workpiece. So as I mentioned, you have your different steps here at the top. So if you want to do some gross jogging, you can switch it over to 1 inch. And you can begin to jog. Now you want to get to some smaller steps, you can go down to 0.1. Whatever you think you need to do. So there's also the bump, park, and work command. So the bump command sends it to my bump stop, which you can see here is the corner of my workpiece. So it first raises the Z axis all the way up, then moves it to the bump stop. Or the park position, which I use after I'm done with the job to move the machine back out of the way so that I can get to the clamps and whatnot or swap out pieces. Then you have your zeros, which that's pretty self-explanatory. The raise Z, which I use that if I'm changing a bit, or this will instead of incrementally jogging the Z up, I can just simply raise the Z all the way to the maximum position so that it's completely out of the way for whatever reason. You have 2 probe settings. One is the probe all, which I use with Charlie's block here, and then you have the probe Z if you just happen to want to just probe the Z of the material and you don't need to do your X and Y. So, and I'll also go into the setup where you can set the dimensions of your probe using this as well. And then the 3 at the top. So home, we already talked about that. Console opens the console of Easel, I already talked about that. And then escape, I have that on here, and this is for exiting the console in Easel. So once you push that, it goes back to your main screen. Again, you can't see it on the monitor, but so that's it for the jogging portion of it. Alright, I'm going to do an example here of the probe all command using Charlie's Triquetra. So the first step is to get your block positioned, get your bit towards the back right corner as I'm showing it here. And then before you execute the command, you'll notice here below the top LEDs there's some bit diameters here. So this is to set your bit diameter for the bit you're going to be using before you start. So in this case I have an 1/8 inch bit in there, so I switch it over to an 1/8 of an inch. And then I will start the probing. Now this command has 2 phases. The first phase is it does the X, and then it moves around to the Y. Now it pauses here and waits for you to push the probe all button again, and it does that because if you're doing a V bit or something where the orientation of the bit matters for when it contacts the block, this gives you time to adjust that and do whatever you need to do. And then you press the button again. It continues on with its command. does the Y, comes up to do the Z. And now you have your machine probed. Alright, now I'm going to go over the setup mode. In this setup mode, you can change the probe thicknesses, tell the pendant which sender you're using, as well as whether or not you have homing switches. So the first thing you want to do is open up your favorite document program on your computer, and you're going to press and hold the setup button for 2 seconds. The setup button is going to come on, and you'll see on the back screen it's going into setup mode. So it shows you the current settings. X, Y, and Z probe, which pendant mode I'm in, and whether or not I have homing switches enabled or not. So if I want to change one of these, it's going to be similar to the jogging for the probe settings. You change the step size to one of these 4, and then use the plus or minuses here to adjust the probe thickness. So as an example, I'm going to change the X probe to 3 inches. So I'm going to change this over to 1 inch, do +1 on the X, and you'll see it's telling me now the new probe is 3 inches. And then the pendant mode and homing mode, this is if you want to switch between Easel, UGS, or PicSender. So to do that, you're going to push the console button, and you can see this here switches to UGS, or to PicSender, or back to Easel. And this changes what the button arrangement does and what G-code it spits out. The last thing is the home switch. So this is going to tell the pendant whether you have homing switches enabled, and this basically is going to, for the bump stop and the raise 0, that's going to determine whether or not it's going to send the code that raises the Z all the way up before it goes to those positions. So once you're finished, you click and hold the setup button again for 2 seconds, the red light will go off, and then it will tell you that it's exiting setup and your new settings that were saved.